Okay, great. So for sure, nice having you on the Cyber JA podcast. And
Oh, happy to
for
be here.
those who are, thank you so very much. And for those who are familiar with the Cyber JA journey in terms of the my channels that I have on other platforms that I do communicate on from time to time, they know that once you talk about Cyber J, this is the place where we discuss all things cybersecurity and GRC. So today, September 16,
Hmm.
marks the official start of the Cyber J podcast. So I must say that I've always wanted to do something like this, something that could really add value to both seasoned and upcoming cybersecurity professionals alike, even those not in cybersecurity.
Hmm.
So I made a start, and I learned something very important in life is that there is no perfect moment. You just need to make that start to get things going. So I just
Absolutely.
did. So I'm extremely delighted to have you. For those who don't know, Greg Schaefer, VC, so podcast of the virtual CISO moment, which I strongly advise persons to subscribe to if you have not already done so.
Thank you.
And with that said, I just want to officially welcome you as my first guest, the first one to one conversation on the Cyber J podcast.
Well, I'm
And
honored to be here and to be the first one. I hope I do a good enough job so that you have at least a second one. So
sure, I know you will. Definitely. Right. And I'm very grateful for the fact that you accepted my invitation. It says a lot about your character. I mean, based on interaction with many other persons.
Mm.
Um, I do listen to your podcast almost every day.
Well, we
And
appreciate that. You're one of five. No, I'm just kidding.
I learned so much from the quality of, there are many podcasts to listen to, but I enjoy not so much the quantity of persons that listen or maybe the popularity, but I like the quality of the content and the discussions that you share. That's one of the things that I really appreciate and follow. And I also made notes that the things that one of my dreams is to actually be a CISO, VCISO in the
Hmm.
future.
Hmm.
So you're one of my mentors. And
Well,
that has led me into wanting to find out more about you. That's
well,
the
I,
reason why.
well, and I appreciate that. I think that it's so important to hear other people's stories. That's why I love doing the virtual CISO moment. Everybody has a different path and how to get to CISO or VCISO or what have you. And it's just an honor and a privilege and a blessing for me to be able to be at that part in my life right now where I'm actually, making a little bit of a difference with folks. So I'm happy to do it.
Yes, certainly. And I must say that you're doing a fantastic job
Yeah.
for sure. Right. So, there's a lot about you that I will not really go into much, but I will actually give you that opportunity. Um, as I said before, this is more of a conversation. It's not, I don't see this as an interview back and forth, but more so to
Right.
have that conversation about no doubt you giving us insightful wisdom that we can use to gain value from. So I want to now give you that opportunity to basically empower, our listeners, especially those who are upcoming into cybersecurity. Your journey, where you got started, I mean,
Starting
what
from
was
the
the career
beginning.
paths, the roadmap of life. Yes,
Sure.
so pretty
Yeah.
much.
So, I never intended to be in cybersecurity, and actually, I'm so old that there wasn't something called cybersecurity when I was like 20, 22, 23. I was a student of aerospace engineering at the University of Buffalo in New York in the United States, and I loved engineering and absolutely loved the idea of like creating things and designing things and all of that. But around that time, that's when the Cold War ended. So the Soviet Union collapsed, and that meant that there was a glut of aerospace engineers. There were too many. And so the job market was looking like, well, I'm not going to get an aerospace job after I leave college, so maybe I should shift down or actually horizontally to mechanical engineering, which is very similar. That a lot of the same courses, which I did, And during this time when I was at the university, I also worked part time at the computing center as a network technician. It beat working in restaurants and fast food, and that was my first exposure to anything computer wise, networking wise. I really didn't know too much. Actually, how I got the job was I was a what they call a crew chief in the United States Air Force Reserves, and the person who hired me, he was a former drill instructor in the Marines, and he said, "Well, if you can read manuals to fix airplanes, you can do this networking stuff." As a side note, when I was also part of Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, so I've been to the UAE before, but it's been like 30 years ago. So
Okay.
I'm sure it's changed just a little
It
bit
has
since
totally
then.
changed. It has totally changed.
Well,
Okay.
anyway, the mechanical engineering field, the job that I thought I was going to get through my internship didn't work out, but they offered me a full-time job on campus in IT. I took it, and that actually started my career. So I grew up, if you will, in networking, but somewhere along the line in my career, I it flipped to more security, and that's because in the networking side, that's typically the business unit in IT that is responsible for like firewalls and network security. And so when I was at a university called Middle Tennessee State University, um, we had to put in our first firewall, and that was the beginning of me stopping people from talking to each other as opposed to making people talk to each other. And then that continued my cybersecurity journey to the point of I progressed up the management chain. My choice. I mean, I know some people preferred to stay on the technical level, which is absolutely perfect, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I wanted to progress to more of a management role. I shouldn't say up. I should say vertically or horizontally rather. And got into governance. Was basically performing the CISO role at the college, at the university when I left. Spent a short period of time as CISO for the metropolitan government of Nashville and Davidson County, big city here in Tennessee. And then became CISO for a bank. And then a few years after that, felt the calling to do something more with my talents and help small and mid-sized businesses with the experience that I gained over the years. And that's how my firm, vCISO Services, started. And so I've been doing this now independently for over 5 years. I've got about a half dozen, a little bit more folks that work with me, and constantly growing and just loving every day.
Okay, great. So, I mean, what has it been in terms of, I mean, having your own operation versus, I mean, working as an employee to now being your own, um, being in charge of your own operations?
Scary at first. So, I mean, I didn't plan to be an entrepreneur, and I've always had another organization provide my paycheck. And when I first started out, I already had a couple of clients that I was working through an MSP with, managed security, well, MSSP, managed security service provider. Too many acronyms in IT and IS. So, but I realized that okay, I think I can do this, and I had faith in doing it, and so that kind of like conquered the fear. But as far as like day to day operations and the environment, I think first of all, there's a lot more discipline required when you're working for yourself. Even if it wasn't me running a business with other staff, if it was just me, there's the you have to be very disciplined to know when to work and maybe more importantly when not to work. I have a type A personality, and if I could work 24/7, I would. I just I have to extract myself from that sometimes, and sometimes I get involved in new projects that really start to overwhelm me, such as the podcast.
Yes.
but um, but there's a lot of freedom associated with it as well. I find that um, I don't have to deal with bureaucracy in the corporate environment, and when you're a consultant, there are less there seems to be less times when um, there are meetings just for the sake of having meetings, because technically speaking, whenever we're engaged, you're paying sort of by the hour. So the client wants to maximize the consultant's time, because otherwise that's going to either, if they don't do that, if they fill the consultant's time with fluff, it's going to either minimize the output, or they're going to have to change scope and say, well, we have to charge you more because we need more time because we spent all this time on what I would call fluff meetings. So certainly a lot of autonomy there, and it takes it takes a certain mindset to achieve that discipline. You have to want it. You have to have a clear vision of where you want to get to, and you have to be not afraid to make mistakes, because I've made a lot of them, but it's okay to make mistakes. You just learn from them and then you continue on.
Yeah, very importantly. And the reason why I actually asked that question based on what you have said is the fact that I made a post the other day on LinkedIn in which I think I had stated that if it is that you want to get into cybersecurity and it is very challenging, why not do something else? Why not try something new? And you spoke about the entrepreneurial journey. So I was just thinking that what advice can you give to individuals in that the cybersecurity industry is very competitive?
Mhm.
What can you do outside of cyber or maybe within cyber at an entry level per se, or maybe on an entrepreneurial level that can actually get you to build in your own experience to create your own profile in order to really get into the industry as an experienced individual?
I think one of the most important things is I spoke at a conference earlier this week on basically talked about my journey, and one of the attendees came up, and she's very young in the field, and she said, she asked me, what advice, what would you tell yourself if you were 19 again? I guess she was 19. What would you tell your 19 yourself self, as far as career advice? The first thing that comes to mind, and I think that the most important thing was networking. And I don't mean data networking. I mean getting out and talking with people. It's so important to have that base of, and it doesn't have to be just in person. Virtual is fine as well too. LinkedIn is hugely important for this. But you establish your brand, you establish your presence out there, um, but you make those contacts, which you never know when and how those contacts are going to produce something bigger. Like, for example, you and I, we connected on LinkedIn. So
Exactly.
and now we're having this great conversation. So from an entry level standpoint, that would be my primary bit of advice. If now from an entrepreneurial standpoint, if you were going to go the route of um, you, you have to have some measure of a business plan, and and a focus of where you're going. I've seen a lot of people that think that they can, instead of going down the path, like say for entry level into cyber, they decide instead of trying to get a corporate job, they're just going to start their own business. Now, that's going to be really tough, because you don't have like a background of experience that you can sell to people that you're trying to get to be your clients. I mean, whenever I go out and talk with a prospect, and I actually have a call later, or a couple of prospect calls later on today, the reason why that they've contacted me and my firm is because of all the experience that we offer. You have to be able to offer something. Now, then that's sort of like the chicken and egg thing. Well, it's like, well, how can I get hired if I need experience? Or how can I get started as an entrepreneur if I need experience, but I don't have experience? How do I get the experience? Well, you can do so much, like in self learning. There's so many things out there. There's Try Hack Me, for example. But you can, I'm a big proponent about building your own lab to learn. you can't leapfrog over certain fundamentals in cybersecurity. You have to know about networking and systems and system architecture and basic security stuff. You have to know that in order to be effective as like a threat hunter or red or blue teaming or what. But you don't necessarily need to have a bookload of certifications or a degree. I've never met a hiring manager that really cares too much about that. They want to see the what the person can actually do as far as to increase security posture. Now, where the roadblock sometimes in is in the corporate policies where HR might say, well, because of the pay level here, you have to have a degree or you have to have a certification. And that's not limited to cyber. That's just the way the world works. Now, and one other story on that before, because I know I'm I'm babbling, but I got my CISSP, Certified Information Systems Security Professional, um, back in 2007. Now, the reason why I got it was because I felt that I was being shut out of a couple of potential information security positions. The same thing with my master's degree in information systems project management. I actually could not apply for a position that I really wanted because I didn't have a master's degree. And that's just the world you live in. So that we live in. So the bottom line is that you don't need those certifications or degree in order to be effective in cyber, but sometimes you need them in order to get through the initial door.
Exactly. I mean, and based on what you have said, this could conversation could go in a number of directions at the moment. But just to backtrack a little, in that made something very important, is that in order to get your foot into cyber, even before you start thinking about um, the certifications or all of these things, it's always very good to get the fundamentals right, to understand those principles. So instead of just thinking about, one of the most famous one is to become a pen tester,
Mm-hmm.
and not understanding the degree of work that is associated with becoming a pen tester, not understanding how systems or networks, all of these things function, then you are not able to be as efficient or effective within the cybersecurity um, in terms of moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how can you be a pen tester to exploit a vulnerability on a certain TCP port if you don't understand
Exactly.
TCP ports, if you don't understand the OSI model, if you don't understand how to take a trace or a PCAP or sniff or whatever you want to call it using Wireshark, and it's a skill to read those PCAPs. I mean,
Yes.
it's not easy. And again, I get back to the home lab thing. You can set up a home lab very cheaply. I did this. Um, I did this in the early 2000s. I was already pretty well established in my career, but I started writing for Computer World just as a freelance off and on, and I wanted to test some things before I wrote about it. I thought that would be the right thing to do, and so I built this home lab, and I basically got equipment from eBay. And I don't think I spent more than like $50 on the whole setup. So I had a router, I had a couple of switches at the time. Well, they were hubs, but still, I mean, it didn't make a difference there. And old laptop, old tower running Linux, whatever flavor. I think I used Fedora at the time. But yeah, it's without the fundamentals. It's sort of like, I mean, would you let someone operate on your heart if they really don't understand the circulatory system? It's like I just
Certainly
kind of
not.
like dive right in. It's like, oh well, let's see what's going on here. Let's move this. Oh, there goes the blood. It's all over the place. So,
Yes, exactly. And now, when you think about, I'm trying to, a lot of times recognize there are different personalities that enter into the cybersecurity field.
oh yeah.
Introvert, extrovert. What's the, how important would you say it is to have that balance between your soft skills versus your technical skill, or there should be a greater in technical skill versus soft skills, because you made something very important about building your your brand, your representation. Is very
Hmm.
good to get out there, get your presence in whichever platform possible, so that you can build those relationships.
Well, I think first of all, I'll step back to something that I think people should avoid. There seems to be an ego problem in information security and cybersecurity, and you really kind of need to quote check that ego at the door, unquote. I mentioned in my talk a little while ago that the secret to cybersecurity success. That was the title of my presentation. And the answer that I've learned over the years is to have the heart of a servant. Because basically, if you're focused on serving others, you're always going to be successful because that is your focus. But if you're focused more on serving yourself, it kind of you kind of can sense it. So whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, and actually it's more likely that an extrovert would be a little bit more on the ego side. Just check the ego at the door and recognize that you're part of an ecosystem that's trying to help others. Now, as far as balance goes and soft skills, I mean, I think that's a great question, because one of these certifications, I know I just kind of said you don't need them, but one of the certifications I think that was the most important in my career and still is, has nothing to do with technology or cybersecurity or information security or anything. And it was through Toastmasters. That's the international organization for making speeches, is what people really think about it as. But Toastmasters is more, in my mind, about learning how to listen. It's so important to listen in cybersecurity, because what you're doing is not about packets and little pieces of information and this and that, or trying to attack or trying to protect. What you're doing is that you're supporting the business. And if you don't understand what that means, what the business is doing, how can you understand risks? How can you understand threats to the business? Because and the only way that you can understand this is that if you spend more time listening and observing as opposed to speaking. So I think that you also have to have the soft skills to be able to communicate some very complicated um, topics. Cyber doesn't come easily to everybody. In fact, for some people in cyber, it doesn't come easily to them. But you have to be able to communicate very technical concepts, whether you're an analyst and you're explaining to the SOC director or to a business unit manager, or if you're a CISO and you're explaining to the C suite and the board of directors what these things mean. Because you can't go to the board of directors and say, we stopped this distributed denial of service by blocking these 14 different IPs or something like that. They don't know what you're talking about. They want to know, it's like, did you fix the problem? Do you think it's going to happen again? Um, and you have to have some. You can't be a total introvert. And unfortunately, the whole COVID season that we went through has the effect of of promoting more introvertness, because there's more working from home. It's so important to, I think, have that connection with people. I mentioned about networking beforehand. It's the same thing, like in your position, in your job. I think we're losing something by having a lot of folks that they just work completely remotely and never have that interaction within the office.
Exactly, very important. And having that skill of communication is very, very vital
Hmm.
in your day-to-day operations, in terms
Absolutely.
of how you relate to persons at various levels, in terms of communicating those technical skills. All right. So, I mean, in light of all that have been said, I mean, very important points. Just to wrap up this very interesting session with you, if you could actually create a roadmap, in summary, just for a cybersecurity professional, I mean, what would that roadmap look like in terms of to say, all right, these are the guidelines, these are the things that you really need to be doing to create that picture at a high level.
Well, I think there needs to be a sense of balance. I think that if you're if you spend too much time as you're beginning your journey focused on just one thing, you may lose sight of the other things, if you will, and then the threats that could actually happen to those other things. Cybersecurity is so holistic because you have to understand a broad range of items and things. I'm a big proponent. I know you don't need certifications, but I'm really a big proponent of the CISSP because it is broad in that it discusses technical stuff, certainly like cryptology and networking, but also other governance, risk management in those areas. So I think that the roadmap starts with understanding that there's more than just trying to break into one box if you're wanting to be a penetration tester, for example. And then understanding too, and I'm kind of repeating myself for something that I said beforehand, but that cybersecurity, just like information technology, it supports the business. And so the more you could learn that business acumen, those are the ones, the candidates that truly shine, the ones that can take the knowledge that they've learned and then apply it to a particular business environment. A simple example of that is I used to, when I was hiring folks, when I was still in charge of networking and security, I would ask, I won't ask this of consultants right now because they would be offended, but I would ask them a series of two questions related. The first one would be, can you explain to me or identify what application uses TCP port 23? And the answer is Telnet. And that's great.
Yes.
So you got the knowledge, yay, right there. Then the follow-up question would be, can you explain to me why you would not want to have port 23 enabled to come in through your firewall? Now, see, that's thinking more about applied knowledge. Now you have to understand that Telnet is unencrypted. And what does that mean to the business? And what does that mean to the threat environment? Now, that's a very simple one, and everybody's going to be able to answer that. But that's what I mean by applied knowledge. So, whatever your roadmap is, don't just get the knowledge, learn how to apply it to the business.
That's a very, very critical point. And for sure, this will definitely lead us into a different discussion because one of the things is that I have done a lot of training courses, CISSP courses, CISA, but I am not a big fan of me, what I would say, exams. It's
Mm-hmm.
like I have a phobia for exams, but I do have the knowledge. If I should actually, so I am more focused on application. I learn the skills, I look at the business situation, and then I pull from the knowledge to remedy the situations and to apply to create security programs and all of these things. But I will definitely leave that discussion for,
Well, well. Let me
yes,
just add one thing to that because that's a good point. Another advice for those in any stage in their cybersecurity career, but certainly starting out, if you don't know the answer to a question and you're in an interview, don't try to fake your way through it. The person asking the question knows the answer. And it's completely acceptable to say that, you know what, I should know that. This is how I would research it. And this is, you can show that you have a methodology to find out the answer because two things. First of all, not everybody remembers everything. Certainly at all times. I've had so much knowledge over the decades put into my head. I've lost most of it, so I have to look it up. But also to your point, and this is what made me think about it, as far as like um, exam test taking fatigue or anxiety or what have you, it's the same thing in the interview. Someone's interviewing, the interviewer is going to know that, hey, this is a very stressful time for you. So it's always best to be honest. Now, if you can't answer like a majority of the questions, well, then you're
That's a
probably not
problem.
going to get the job. I mean, but if you can't remember like a few things, just don't worry about it. So, but you're right. That's a conversation for another day.
Yes. All right. So there we have it. The first episode of Cyber J. And I am definitely, it's a pleasure. I definitely enjoyed the conversation, Greg. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. It was very insightful and definitely hope to have you in future podcasts.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me.
All right. So please enjoy the rest of your podcasts and future recordings.
I appreciate that. I will. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you so very much.